Okay, this is the grinder I used, just so you know what I'm talking about. We're going to get back to that a little bit later. So, changing the, man, I haven't thought about this. Changing the crankshaft sensor. So I got a new one. It's not exactly like the old one, but it looks like it's going to work. It's supposed to work according to the website. I'm going to show you how to test it when I'm done installing it. So you watch the whole video, and then you can learn how to test the one that you got to make sure it's bad before you start working on it. This is a very difficult project. So I'm really mad at the engineers for building this like this. It's so hard to repair, it's ridiculous. Okay, first of all, this is the end of the plug, which will be right here. I always cover it in plastic because in Florida, if you leave it sit, it'll rust, corrode very quickly. It's hot as heck right now too, so I'm about to pass out. So the first thing you're going to need to be able to get your hands in here is to take your belts off, which I'm sure you can figure out. You just stick a big socket on here, turn it, loosens up the belt, pop it off. Okay. Then you want to take the water pump cover off, because right underneath the water pump is a little bolt you're going to need if your car is stock and you haven't done this before. So go ahead and remove that, because you're not going to be able to get your hand in there. So what they did was they put on this dust cover around the crank, which was very difficult to get off. There's no instructions that I could find. So one goes on the top, one goes on the bottom, and it has a bolt, see, a bolt hole. So underneath your water pump, there's a bolt holding that on. So you got to get your socket underneath there to get this off. These just kind of snap together, but you still kind of need a screwdriver to get them off. I don't know if you can see that connection, but I'm not going to put it back on when I'm done, because it's just too much trouble getting it on and off. But anyway, some kind of dust cover for the crank. But you have to get it off before you can reach your sensor. I mean, I'm sure it's a good feature when the car is brand new, but don't really need it right now. So so the book, when I looked up changing the crank sensor, says to pull the harmonic balance. But I didn't do that. I didn't want to do that. You got a fan, radiator in the way. I mean, it's just, plus getting it off, putting it back on was just way too much work, in my opinion, if you can avoid it. So I didn't take the harmonic balancer off. And besides that, there's like extra junk behind it. So I tried my hardest to get it off, which I did without taking it off. But since I didn't take it off, I ran into a problem. So there's these two little screws that are holding the crank sensor on there. Two of these, which is so annoying, because if you see how small that is, that's a 5.5 millimeter. very, very small. It's another annoying thing. So, what you have to do is, unless you have an exact match screwdriver, I didn't go up to the Harbor Freight to see if they had an exact match, because I was afraid that I would just be wasting my time, and I didn't want to drive up there. Plus you gotta wait in line and wear a mask and all this stuff. So I found out that if I take one of these sockets, see these little sockets, and I get the right size, but the problem is, to get to that screw, it is being covered, halfway being covered by the harmonic balancer magnetic device that they have. It goes in a circle. So I had to grind down these sockets. You see. So this was originally this size. Let's see if I can show it to you. Okay, it's rolling around. That's no good. Okay, how about right here? You see, these were both the same size, but you have to grind each side. I can still see the number. I think that says 6.5. So you have to hold it with a pliers, grind one end, dip it in water to cool it off because it gets hot. It'll burn your fingers. Grind the other end because it has to fit between the screw and the harmonic balance. I'll just call it the harmonic balancer, whatever that. But anyway, the one that fits, I did like 3 of them. The one that fits is a 5.5 millimeter. Maybe you can get a 5.5 millimeter screwdriver that's kind of flexible before. Okay, I have to work inside for a few minutes because my phone overheats out in the hot sun. So this is the old crank sensor. So the new one's a little different. It's a little bigger, which caused a problem, but I got through it. So the thing that I was having a problem with is when I jiggled this out, which way did it go back in? So an understanding of how it works will help. This is this slot here that you can see. I point to it. This slot. So there's a thin, round piece of metal connected to the harmonic balancer, and it goes through there in a circle, kind of like a disc brake. So some cranks are just a magnet where you have a use like a matchbook to measure the gap. This one, because it's a Hall effect, that it goes through there. So then that means this side goes to the engine and this side goes to the harmonic balancer. So the new one, because I didn't want to pull the harmonic balancer off, the new one is a little bit bigger down here, a little bit different. Same principle. It doesn't just slide into place. There's not enough space. Which is why essentially they want you to pull the harmonic balancer, but I didn't want to do that. So when I tried to squeeze it through, sideways. It wouldn't go at first. So then I tried to go top down and hook it on there like that. Wouldn't go. So I wound up almost getting it, and then I thought, well, if I put grease all around everywhere. So I greased everything up, and it wouldn't go this way, like hook on that way, but it went through sideways. So I kind of pushed it with a big screwdriver, or no, actually I didn't use a screwdriver. I used a extension to a socket set, 3/8" extension, and I greased it and pushed it sideways, and then it finally, and I turned the crank, the harmonic balancer with my hands and helped push it into place, and then finally it went into place. So it's kind of dangerous because you're putting a lot of pressure on these plastic, so you don't want to overdo it. If it's not going to go, don't force it too much. Give it a little bit of force, but you don't want to break any of this plastic off, because this is what your Hall effect is. So I'm not even sure. I put a lot of pressure on it, but I'm not sure it's even going to work now. So we're going to have to try it out. And also, the ends don't match up. The big end matches up, but this one don't match up, the little one. But I think that's for the radio resistance or radio static. So I may not even need it, but if I do, I'm going to cut this and make it match up. And also, don't forget to put some dielectric grease down on these poles down in here before you put it back together. Keep it from getting corroded. So let's go out to the car and see what's going on. Okay, I didn't pull off the harmonic balancer, so that made it more difficult, but still possible. So this metal strip back here, very thin metal strip, is what goes through the gap in the crank sensor. So there's like a metal strip, and then they cut it away, and then another metal strip, then they cut it away, and I think there's 3 of them. So you're trying to put the crank sensor into position where the metal's been cut out, the blank spot. And then, before you tighten it down, I'm going to try to put a business card on each side. I don't know if it's going to work. I'm not even sure I could hold the camera while I'm doing it. I'll let you know when it's all over. I might put a little dab of the blue stuff to keep the screws from coming out, but just a little bit, because they're hard to get out to begin with. And I don't want to strip it, getting it back out if I ever have to change the crank again. Oh, Loctite or whatever you call it. So I'm just going to put a little dab on the bottom of the screw so it won't come loose when I'm driving. And that's it for now. I'll get back with you when I'm done. Okay, so what I did was I got a socket to crank the harmonic balancer, and then this is a piece of business card right here. I tore it and it fit in there, so it's coming out the other side. And I cranked it so that the big piece of metal is now in the middle of the crank sensor. I'm not going to be able to put one on the underside, but what I was thinking is if I just push down on the business card and tighten it on this side, that should be a good gap. And then when I pull the business card out, I'll know it's not touching, and it's pretty much the best I can do. So I'm going to use my tool of choice again, which I hand made, the 5.5 millimeter miniature socket. And then once you grind it down, the square won't fit, so I used a Phillips screwdriver with a nice size handle, and then I'm just going to tighten it up like that, and that'll turn the socket. I can't hold the camera and turn the socket at the same time, so just going to have to trust me on that. Alright, so just wanted to show you, to get this to fit, the socket has to fit in between the screw and the harmonic balancer so that it falls below, so you can't go straight in with your socket unless you have like a flexible screwdriver. And then you take this Phillips and you put it in a little bit diagonal like that. See that? And it should be just enough to tighten those screws hand tight, so that it'll be hand tight when you get them off, if you need to take it off again. Okay, so there's the business piece of paper right here on that gap, and I push down here with one hand, tighten the screw with another, and I'm going to pull that paper out. Then the next thing you want to do is crank, put a socket inside the harmonic balancer and crank it, and make sure that it does a full revolution without binding into the crank sensor, because if you just get in the car and crank it and it hits it, it's going to break it if it's not lined up. So I'm going to do one full revolution to make sure it's not touching any of the sides. Okay, so this is the breakout box, and there's the computer that hooks to the breakout box. Or actually, I should say, the breakout box sits between the computer and its bracket. So, what happened is, when you go to the breakout box chart, you see that it's the PIP for the crank sensor is number 56, which I already showed you on the computer, but I'll show it to you again. And you see it's saying 0, 12, or when it's running, 6.6. So it's key on, engine off, key on, engine running. Okay, so what I did was, the first thing you do is you see if your circuit's getting power. So you turn the key on and you see the light came on. See that? Vehicle power. So there's electricity, turn it off. There's electricity going through the system. Key on. Okay. Then pin 56 is your crank sensor. See that? So it has these little, came with these little things that they fit in the hole real good, so you don't want to stick in. You can stick in your voltmeter, but it's probably not the right size. Might be a little too big. You know, for example, this one. So you can. It's got some other ones that look like that. So anyway, there's another one that goes to ground, which is 60. See, 60 is always your ground. Okay, your vehicle power. You just want straight power. So when I tested it with the bad crank sensor, I cranked it, and that voltmeter needle didn't move the whole time I cranked it. Did not move. So this time though, as soon as I hooked it up, it gave me 12. It gave me 12 volts, which means that as the crank is going in a circle, it's got 3 hits on it. So it's hit, don't hit, hit, don't hit, hit, don't hit. So as you turn it, the crank, you know, with a big socket, you're going to get 12 volts, then you're going to get 0 volts, then you're going to get 12 volts, then you're going to get 0 volts. But if it's running, you're going to get the middle range, which is 6.6 volts, okay? So when I cranked it and this didn't move, that means the crank sensor was no longer functioning, okay? Also, somebody said you could use your RPM gauge, which mine went, I'm not sure that's actually going to work, so I'm not going to testify to that, because it still moved. It moved about halfway to 1 with a bad crank sensor. It moved about halfway to 1. Okay, right there. But now, I can't really crank it without starting the engine unless I disassemble something, which I don't want to do. Crank it and then not run the engine. So I don't want to test that. But just to show you, I can't really hold the phone and hold my voltmeter at the same time, unless I stuck them in the holes, which I don't want to do that either. So I guess I could stick the ground in there a little bit. That touching. Maybe I can stick it in there like that. 56. Wait, that's the wrong one. Actually, I might even be able to use that as a test light. Let's see what the end of that looks like. It's just a alligator clip. So, if this is a test light that works, you could use something like that. But I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use this. See that? So I turn the key on, I'm already getting 12 volts. That means it's on the cycle where it's touching, it's going, the piece of metal is going through. You see that 12 volts? I wouldn't even get that with the bad crank sensor. So that's how you test your crank sensor, which is the beginning of your spark, which is the hardest thing to change in my opinion. So if that's working, don't change your crank sensor. That's my point. Diagnose it first. I don't know if it'll show me what the speedometer, not the speedometer, RPMs will do without starting. Well, maybe we could analyze that. No, it didn't really do much different than a bad crank sensor. But you hear the engine running with the new crank sensor. Okay. And there you have it. And of course you could test other things, but I just need this car to just run. That's it. Thanks for watching.